right? I'm going to dwell on the moment that I realized that what I had wasn't right and that I needed to move to open ecosystems, and talk a little bit about the starting point of healthcare systems and where we're going. So a little bit about me. I'm CEO of the NHS Digital Academy, visiting professor at Imperial College, lead the Arch Collaborative body of knowledge for class research on the research side. Also advisor to the Salford NCA group, where I used to be director of digital. I used to be, on their board. That's a 1.8 billion turnover NHS organisation that spans from social care right the way through to hyperacute, stroke, rare diseases, those sorts of things. So I'm going to really dwell from my different perspectives on the system. And all of these folks, by the way, at the top are people that have been very pivotal in my life. So first of all, the top lady is Helen, one of our patients who had ankylosing spondylitis, who was, very pivotal in changing our systems and challenging us, and part of our open data story. We've then got my CMIO and CNIO from Pennine up at the top there. Katie and Georges, they're great. We then got John, who's one of my anaesthetists, who worked on changing really how we did things at Salford in terms of theatres and the record. And then we've got a set of my community nursing team there from Salford who were super interesting. They were using we were using GPS tracking for nurses in terms of placing them, a bit like the sort of, fleet management, and using clinical prioritization as part of the algorithm. So those people are all part of this story. And I wanted to put them up there because much as I can talk about many of the things I've done, there are a whole cast and crew of amazing people, many of whom are patients, clinicians, and professionals. So what I want to dwell on really is the first point at which I realized that I had a really major problem. Yeah. And this came about maybe 5-6 years ago. I'd already been working with openEHR a bit, but, I just thought it was good practice. And I didn't really realize I had a major problem. I just thought it was good to consolidate data. But I came in one day and I found out that my great teams had plumbed in this app. This is about 5 or 6 years ago. And actually, it was taking results and pain scores from the patient's home and all sorts of other things. And it was being used by rheumatology and arthritis and a few other services. And actually, it was really good stuff. But I was like, well, where are you storing this data? And they said, we're putting it into the back end of Allscripts. I'm like, so are you recording that these are like results in the same way that they're clinical results? Or have you got some kind of data provenance next to it? And they said, no, it's just going into the standard kind of data structures, but we can't annotate, where we got it from. We can't say what device it came from, or whether it came from the patient's home, or whether they were an inpatient. I was like, we've got a problem here, because we can't differentiate between clinically gathered data and patient gathered data. So we sat there and I kind of said, we need an extension to our EPR. I said, we use openEHR, we like that, that's good stuff. Why don't we build an extension and basically put in these results there and then read them into the EPR and present them in the front end? And that's what we ended up doing. And that study was really, really interesting because we were taking results from the patients. We were working out which patients may be exacerbating. That was being used in clinic as a kind of run of the pain rates and the, various home recorded outcomes, which was informing, how those chats went. Sometimes, the clinicians were saying you don't need to come in based on what they were seeing. Sometimes they were saying you probably need to come in sooner. But equally, the secondary use of that data was for a set of studies, and those studies were around the efficacy of various, interventions and pathways. And one was a really interesting study from Manchester University, which was called Cloudy with a Chance of Pain, which got international coverage. And what that correlated directly was pain scores against weather patterns. Yeah. And what we learned from that was that under certain weather conditions, chronic pain increased with these, groups on the whole, and with specific people we knew it was going to, become a problem. And so medication could be proactively taken based on what was known to be happening with the weather. And that was really interesting. So if you have chance, Google Cloud with a chance of pain. But that was the point at which I realized, oh, I need to be able to extend my data model flexibly. And, openEHR allows you to then, bolt on model data of your own choosing, which is what we kind of did. I put a number of my clinicians through the archetype sort of modeling piece. And so that was a really interesting moment for me. And it's one that I will play back because, funnily enough, last night I was again on the phone with Paul Black, who's the chief exec of Allscripts, on my continuing debate with him around about how we deal with this, because he's been quite accepting and supportive of what I did with openEHR. He more than tolerates openEHR, he supports it as part of his ecosystem. But at some point we need to work out what that true sort of interaction between the solutions is going to be. Okay, so I kind of figured out some other interesting things, but it was only in the last year, 2 years that I figured this out. So all of us know that vendor neutral archives in the DICOM space are absolutely amazing. Yeah, they're fantastic. I've just worked on a project where we've got 300,000 chest images together for AI work. It's great because it's all in one format. And that makes life an awful lot easier. So we all love VNAs, and in imaging, we've got it right. But I was bugged by two things. I was bugged by the fact, one, we had loads and loads of different formats of data locked into different systems with different formats and different coding, and SNOMED wasn't unified, and on it went on that side. And the other thing that bugged me was that we weren't able to deal with the variance in patient need. Yeah. So we couldn't service home-based pathways. We couldn't service diffuse pathways that met, different citizens' sort of, capabilities to self-care versus those that needed more intense, professional help. I actually went and did a diagnostic with a model called Viable Systems Model, which came from the 60s and 70s. It came out of the kind of end of the Second World War and ARPA and the innovation and the wash-up they did on everything that happened then, the Americans. And Viable Systems Model looks at where we tolerate unwarranted variation in a system and where we're not tolerating enough variation. So I sat with these guys from the US. So there were Carnegie Mellon and Macy Foundation, a few other people. And we did this diagnostic, and we worked out that in the technology space, we had a real problem. We were tolerating unwarranted variation because data shouldn't vary that much, systems shouldn't vary that much, and it was it was taking the cognitive load from our CMIOs, our CNIOs, our CIOs, all of our teams, right? The cognitive load of managing what we had was high, and it was not safe either. On the other side, we were looking at the patients, and the variety that we need to tolerate in the system is the biology of the patients. Eventually we'll get to pathways with an N of 1 because everyone's got, their own biology. But actually, we need to, for biology and social factors, be able to provide variance for the pathway if we're going to be as efficient as we can be, and if we're going to harness the patient and actually, serve everyone's needs. And what we need to do is to be able to, adapt to becoming more personalized in the pathways, because that's warranted variation. There is variation in humans, which we can't stop, change, or whatever else. We're not going to make everyone want the same thing or need the same thing. We can't change their DNA. And so that made it pretty clear to me, because it was quite a scientific, exercise we went through with Viable Systems Model, and running it through all of that, I was pretty clear. Okay, we tolerated variation in our system in the wrong place. We've got our attention in the wrong place. We've got the variety in the wrong place, and our cognitive load is way too high, and it's in the wrong place. And so that was the moment at which I became very convicted that we needed VNAs, a vendor neutral sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say archives are passive, but vendor neutral spaces for our data. That is the logical design piece. That is what good engineering would be. And so I became quite interested in how we take that forward policy-wise, how we take that forward with those that have got, existing systems and those that have got greenfield sites. So I'm still an advisor at Salford. I used to be the CIO and director of digital up until a year ago, so I still have an active role there. So, you know, on the back of this openEHR piece, we decided that we could deal with new data types and plug and play. And somebody asked a very interesting question about, you know, the wider data. I'll tell you what we did. We were potentially taking sensor data in that ran over e-enabled homes, because we were building e-enabled homes, but we didn't interface, for instance, to the building management system that managed those homes and their temperature and hot water. And that's an interesting one. How big do you go? So we could plug and play for data. And I think we said we would plug and play for data that was pertinent to the human being and their state. The provenance and the data quality rule. And it's very interesting. Our railways in the UK, they depreciate their data over decades, and they capitalize their data over decades. Data is for life. It's got decades worth of use for the system and for the individual. And so the provenance of the data and the quality should rule, and we should really be capitalizing it over many more years than the system that sits on top of it today, because systems will come and go. It'll be voice driven and gesture driven and goodness knows what else. In doing that, in doing what we did with that big cleanup and unifying data, we were able to real-time score with the community and GP data for dementia, delirium, AKI, sepsis, frailty, etc. And so it actually created a liquidity that was safe to do some algorithmic work on with our data scientists that then could be put into operation, and that was good. I'm just quickly going to whiz through this bit. Now, this is another part of my life with class, and we've actually got 220 organizations and, you know, over 200,000 clinical responses now. But the point I want to drive home with this is across the main EMRs. It includes some sites in your country and my country and the US and Australia, and on it goes, right? But, you know, the graph hasn't changed much. We've got a lot more responses since I put this original slide deck down. But what you can see here is there's Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, Meditech, Best of Breed, and a couple of other solutions that are linked by these lines, right? And what that tells you is, and this has been correlated directly to quality of care, right? That you know, this is the question: do you believe your digital systems or EMR deliver high quality care? And the response then correlates with leapfrog back to the quality of care in the organization. It varies between 98%. So would you get on a plane if the pilot said they were 90% happy that it delivered high quality flights, versus 5%, under 5%? Would you get on a plane if the pilot said, yeah, we deliver about 5% high quality flights with these planes? That's the whole point. This varies, and the common factor is not actually your EMR or digital system. Yeah. Which leads to a whole lot of conclusions. And actually 60% is about education, it's about governance, and it's about what you have in your organization. Sorry, 60% is about education, personalization, 80% is governance and culture, which leaves 22% to do with the EPR vendor, including some best of breed and you know, solutions with openEHR in there. Which leads me to the conclusion that really, if the, you know, the system is not the biggest factor in success, education and governance is, as long as you've got a semi-decent system, should we not be buying systems that are future-proofed, that create great data, that allow us to take the data and use it for automation, for AI, for all of those things? The differentiators here, I think, are around what it adds to the future and what it does in terms of creating great data to power the enterprise. So, you know, I would be buying systems that create data that don't have a huge cognitive load and that allow me to plug and play other things into them. For instance, the RPA work that I've recently been doing about, you know, sort of creating referrals and interactions and so on, that allow citizens to rebook appointments and then, you know, make some prioritization based on clinical need. That's what we need to do for the future. So my view here is that we need to take a different lens, I think, to what's important to our healthcare systems. Okay, so it's interesting. those organizations that are happy using their EMR or best of breed or whatever they've got great cultures, they're optimistic, focus on trust, their clinicians really work with them, and so there's a great culture. Less satisfied organizations, I always think that the new technology will solve something, and they're in a cycle of problem, new technology, and they just don't feel that they have anything under their control that can improve satisfaction. So actually, that's interesting for me. It says to me overall that many of the factors to do with EPR or digital system satisfaction are not really much to do with the EMR itself. They're more to do with the people, the culture, and everything you do. And so you'll probably, even you put a brilliant open data system into a bad organization, it wouldn't work. If you put a great one in, and the same for Epic, Cerner, or whatever else. So that really gave me some hope that actually you couldn't buy your way to a wonderful situation, i.e. there was no one panacea solution. There wasn't anything I was missing, basically. So for those without an EMR, I meet those, and they need the correct enterprise architecture. Is that the right word, or do I need the correct systemic design approach? It could be that. They need to focus on the following things for procurement: data liquidity, openness, and standardization. We need that great data that will serve us today and in 50 years' time. The ability to extend the data model rapidly so that you can put in new data types. And I know Ian's on the call and he knows all about what's happened during COVID with openEHR, but how rapidly those data models were built and put into operation was astounding. The ability to support data provenance, so knowing what version of things we used, where it was gathered, and that's really important. The more data provenance we have about these new models occur, the more we can actually evaluate them, and it's also really valuable for quality and safety to have data provenance. Consumer data, yeah, we need to be able to integrate with that and potentially pull it into the record and market as such. We need to design for this AI and automation world. This digital twin, if we ever get to it, is going to need that clean codified real-time data. We need to focus on education and personalization at the front end, because actually I'm doing the next study now, which looks at what are the factors that create great data input. Because if data is so important, how do we make users as eloquent and as precise as possible? And I'm really interested in that education and personalization piece. And again, how that applies to different types of systems. And we need to build those individualized pathways. We cannot treat one size fits all. So we cannot just, I'm diabetic, they pull me in every 6 months. I don't need it. I could have a telehealth appointment. I need one pathway. An older person might need another one. Somebody that speaks a different language may need it delivered another way. We need to, sort different pathways out. And so for those without an EMR, that would definitely be my focus. For those with an EMR, okay, how do you build an open platform around it? And that's what I've done with Allscripts. It was a hybrid environment, and all kudos to Paul Black. He didn't get litigious. He didn't try and block me. He just got really curious, and still is, which is good. Over time, you'll shrink your core of that EPR. You'll keep some of the EPR functionality, but you'll make choices about what you do in this openEHR or innovation platform. You move on to apps and plug and play and IoT once you get the ability to blend that in. You put a focus on education and personalization, so actually pushing people towards understanding why it's important they put great data in, and which personalizations in the tools will lead them to put great data in and use data in a really good way. And you'll end up in a world where all of your data is normalized and open. That's the panacea. That's really the good design principle. And we're still seeing an awful lot of data blocking. In fact, there's a big conference going on in the US today with Epic, Cerner, Allscripts, and others to try and get to the bottom of why they're data blocking. I think we all know, but it's interesting to see that they are. And don't build any more non-open functionality into the EMR. If the data won't come out and you can't use it for data science, don't build it into the EMR. Don't build on the EMR if it's not going to be something that's going to be future-proofed. So my conclusions: start with the end in mind. Where do we need to get to? a great design that meets our future needs, and design and own systemically. And that means being a very cognizant owner of the environment, a cognizant buyer of what you buy, and taking time, not being hasty about what you do, and not necessarily buying the cheapest thing, but buying the best thing for the environment and the citizens. So that's me.
Thank you, Rachel. Interesting talk. I hope we have some questions. I don't see ones in the chat, but I have a question. I think in the Dutch situation, I think most hospitals have EMRs. Actually, all of them have EMRs. So I would be very interested in how you positions this EMR next to your, so the openEHR next to your EMR, and what kind of applications you build on top of that. How did that work? Maybe you can expand a little bit on that.
So Allscripts, it's super easy. They don't put blocks in the way. So basically you can render as a web block in the patient record sections that are data from elsewhere, right? So it's super easy. You read it in, it's all good. Not all EMRs are that super easy to integrate with. So examples, so the data from the home, the data from the mobile apps, we would basically have pain scores graphed out, and we would say this is lifestyle data based on their pain perception at home, and we would score that out in a graph, right? And you know, explaining to Paul Black and Allscripts, I was like, I needed to do something really quickly, and then other things started to come out. So we were, you know, using dipstick urine tests in the home, right? And we did want to put that into the results table because it was a certified medical device, but we wanted to store some other bits and pieces around that transaction and interaction also in openEHR, so we knew more about it, right? And then our PHR data we started putting into openEHR,
Personal health record,
the health record data, so stuff they're entering via the different apps. And so people in my team lovingly referred to the openEHR bit as the extension, because it was the extension to the data model that we just couldn't, you know, it would be a 12 to 18 months development cycle if you could justify it to Allscripts to put it into the core. And if you're an innovator, you can never justify it because there's never enough critical mass, right? So this allowed us to be bimodal. But if you've got a Cerner, oh, it's a more difficult job. I've just been trying to integrate some of this. I know certainly with CIMI, I think, Ian, if I'm right, Cerner broke out some of this data into open archetypes, didn't they? I think into Mountain. That was, you know, something that they did. I'll also call out Northwell in America, who've normalized out some of their data for other reasons out of the big systems. So I would say I'm seeing more success normalizing data out and using it rather than blending data with Cerner and Epic, but for me, there was no option. I had to really find a way of safely storing data without allowing, you know, a feral set of systems that sat alongside each other to kind of mushroom and grow, you know? If we had
like Access databases or Excel sheets or
just, you know, I had to have like a home for the new data. We put research stuff in there as well, and it just became it became what we call the bimodal extension. So it allowed our ninjas to go and ninja while the samurais had Allscripts. So they worked on the big clinical system, and then the ninjas would go and do tests of change aligned with the IHI methodology in agile sprints. So it was their kind of repository.
So you were, so this 12 to 18 months, how small did it get? How quickly could you go and implement some new innovation? Have any idea?
Weeks,
Months.
So we're doing 2-week sprints, so maybe 3 2-week sprints.
Okay. CJ has another question. Well, he's asking, what is the reason for the data blocking?
Because it breaks their business model, right?
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit like the PACS. If they allow all of the data out, then you know the cost of it will commoditize. The cost of PACS went down a lot when the opening happened. It's interesting. If they open up, people will do stuff elsewhere, right? They're basically holding by not giving all of the data out, right, I'm just going to QDOS all scripts again, and let me dump the data out however I wanted, which could be hellish dangerous if you didn't know what you're doing. But they never stop me. But these big EMR vendors on the whole tend to put it into their T's and C's that you're not allowed to, or physically block you, or make it against your terms of service. So, you know, and the reason is to stop you innovating elsewhere. So you have to innovate with them and pay.
Sure. Ian, raise his hand.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's actually a really complex question. What Rachel said is absolutely true, but we know in the US, certainly there's data blocking by the software vendors, but there's also data blockings by the healthcare institutions because they don't want to share it for their own purposes. Now, we don't have that. We certainly don't have it in the UK, and I suspect the Netherlands is the same. I think the other factor is that, remember, a lot of these systems have really pretty old-fashioned internal IT. So, I mean, I used to say things like, oh, this is not a technical problem, sharing data. Actually, it is.
It is.
It actually is quite difficult for them to get data out, and definitely to get data in and handle new kinds of data. So it's not just, there are some certainly commercial barriers, but there are other technical barriers as well.
For sure. For sure. Literally the tin can't bear some of the transactions on this. It really couldn't manage it, you know, and people have bought like server farms, and it's not spec'd up to take an extra 20% transactions or whatever based on us allowing patient access via APIs. There's all sorts of reasons, you're right, and the payer stuff in the US, they don't want you to go out of the network, so they don't want your data to flow out of their EMR so that you can go to a different hospital and pay that hospital. So it's not necessarily the vendors colluding, it's the healthcare organizations colluding over there.
So CJ is doing a follow-up question, and he's asking you, how do you expect the battle to be resolved? So for data blocking, I think before you answer, I think in the Netherlands, we are moving to saying that we need interfaces for at least getting data out of a system. And we're basing that on FHIR. I'm curious how that is in the UK or the US.
Interfaces aren't good enough. You need, I used to run data science teams that needed insights on data. You need your data out for big data sets. APIs don't do that. Actually, I'll be provocative here. So what I'm going to say is this will be done, I think, in Europe when we decide that we're going to make GDPR real time. I want everything you've got about me real time. I think that's interesting. And we've got patient groups who are saying that they want to do that in the UK.
Interesting.
I guess the situation in the UK is not dissimilar. So, the headline message is we'll just sort all this out by having interfaces. Now, that's obviously going to help, and we have to do that now, and that's where HL7 FHIR is definitely playing an important role. The question is, will it be enough? Will it be enough commercially for the reasons we've talked about? Is it going to be enough technically? Can we actually get a properly integrated system? Well, actually, the individual applications we're trying to bind together are not actually integrated. They don't have any coherent. Can we build a coherent system from bits of whatever's lying around, or do we have to start to go down the platform approach where we start building a coherent ecosystem, and around that we build the apps? And that's the openEHR value add. Is what we're trying to do is to start from that different basis.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to shoot off now anyway, because I'm teaching, but thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, we're going to close up as well because we're over time already, I suppose.
Thank you so much for having me anyway. It's been great.
Thanks, Rachel, for being here. And thanks, Eric, as well, for being here. I think with that last comment of Ian, we can wrap up this session, because I think we said we would stop the discussion about 3 minutes ago. So I think it's good to close up this session. A lot of steps still to go for freeing up our data in an open ecosystem, but the ideas are there and some of the practices are there already. So yeah, really great to see, and I hope to see some of you or all of you in the next meeting on the 27th, when we are going to look at the HIMED project, very interesting project on 7 German universities. Thank you all for joining, and have a good weekend.